Welcome to Sinister Heroes. I'm your host, Danny Iniquitous. Thank you for tuning in. If you're new to the channel, this is a channel about Dungeons and Dragons, and we're trying to take a darker tone with everything we do here. So if you like edgier kind of content, definitely hit that like and subscribe button. A big thank you to our Patreon supporters. We love you guys. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. What you do is absolutely amazing. If you're interested in becoming a Patreon supporter, the link is in the description. With that out of the way, we're going to jump into this video where we're talking about the last of the rulers of the Nine Hells, the ruler of all Baator, Asmodeus. So there is a lot to cover about Asmodeus or Asmodeus, depending on how you want to pronounce it. He is the ruler of the Nine Hells. So he is the one who promotes and demotes, and the one who's in charge of leading the blood war and fighting the demons and keeping all the Nine Hells in checks. He is the reason why you don't break a contract with a devil, because if you do, that contract ultimately belongs to Asmodeus, and he will take your soul for breaking it. There is no greater evil in the Nine Hells than Asmodeus. He is awesome. He is incredibly powerful. He is super smart, and he is older than humanity. His knowledge and power goes vast beyond what people have been able to uncover in the world. There's a couple of different rumors and stories about his creation. We'll be discussing one, but not all of them, because there is a bunch, and that would take multiple episodes just to cover each one. So without that, I feel like just picking my favorite one is going to be one that we're going to talk about, but we'll touch on some of the others. So first and foremost, he has a bunch of great titles. He is the Supreme Master of the Nine Hells, Lord of Nessus, Lord of the Ninth, Lord Below, the Lord of the Ruby Rod, the Lord of Lies, the Prince of Evil, the God of Evil, the Cloven, the Old Hoof and Horn, the Great Devil, the Archfiend, the Raging Fiend, the Reigning Serpent, the Rebellious One. All these wonderful titles really give you a good taste of the kind of legacy of evil that Asmodeus has. So first, let's talk about what Asmodeus looks like. So Asmodeus' true form was that of a scaled serpent hundreds of miles long. His acid black blood, a substance beyond foul, exuding from eons old wounds. His former sheer size made it impossible for him to meet and enter into conversations with others. And so he created the humanoid-looking avatars. He never showed himself except through avatars or highly advanced project image spells, both in humanoid form. So nobody's really seen the scaled serpent version of Asmodeus. This is really, really important because the devils themselves only know him through his avatar. The avatar of Asmodeus that was humanoid looking was handsome, charismatic, and captivating on the surface, appearing as a slim, red-skinned humanoid over 13 feet tall, with a horned head, glowing red eyes, and a perfectly trimmed beard. He wore black and red clothing valuable enough to cover the annual spending of any nation. But underneath these expensive garments, his body was racked with bleeding injuries he was seemingly unconcerned by. This will go a little bit into the history of who he is, but it is something that's really, really important as to the justification of all the things that are occurring in the Nine Hells, in the universe, and everything that has to do with him. It's really important, so we'll put a pin in that just for now. So there isn't really much to talk about the realm of Nessus, which is the ninth layer of the Hells, which is where Asmodeus' seat of power is. It's just, it gets deeper and deeper. It's kind of like one great gorge almost. Like it keeps going down into what the lowest point, which is where the serpent's coil is, where it's rumored that Asmodeus' true form lays. And from his fall to hell, which is something we're going to discuss in this video, the wounds that he suffered still ooze out. And from that, pit fiends and very powerful devils emerge from. It is full of soldiers and pit fiends ready to fight for a coming battle that only Asmodeus is aware of. But no one is allowed to travel to Nessus. You cannot go to Nessus. Every entranceway is heavily guarded, and the only one that issues letters allowing you to transfer through the different levels of the Nine Hells at all are all issued by Asmodeus, and he gives no one authorization to go to Nessus. So just getting there is practically impossible, and surviving there is even worse. The last thing you want to do is actually draw the ire of Asmodeus because you're trespassing. But instead, I wanted to talk, since we're not going to really talk about the lair, I want to talk about Asmodeus' most important possession, and that is the ruby rod. So the ruby rod has a very important stance in the whole of Asmodeus, or Asmodeus. So the original ruby rod of Asmodeus was created by Asmodeus himself from the Shard of Evil. Now, the Shard of Evil is this, it's basically all the evil condensed from the demons of a different universe that they threw into the realm that we're in, like the universal encapsulated multiverse where D&D takes place. And from plunging that into there, into, I forget what primordial plane or what essence or primal essence it was plunged into. I apologize. I know I covered it briefly. But that's where the abyss comes from. And the abyss is growing. And at the bottom of the abyss is where the shard of pure evil exists. All the demons want this shard because it would grant them immeasurable power. Asmodeus went there and broke a piece off of the shard of evil, and that is in the ruby rod of Asmodeus. Now, when he broke this piece off, he killed at that time his superior, which is named He Who Was. This is covered in one of the rumors of to how Asmodeus kind of came to be. So it's one of those things where it might really be true or might not be. But in order to make the ruby rod, it required a huge ruby soaked in the blood of 1,000 sacrificed mortals, quenched in Tiamat's acidic saliva, and polished with 77 angel tears. All these things had to be done for Asmodeus to gain the ruby rod. Now, in the beginning of the Blood War and everything, there is the trial of Asmodeus. Through this, he's being judged by Primus. And after this whole thing is done, which we will cover when we cover the Blood War and its origin, Primus, the god of law and order, makes it an obligation for Asmodeus to always carry the ruby rod. And the rod would act as both as a symbol for him and his devils, the right for them to forge pact with mortals, and as a punishment device for all devils that do not respect the strictures of their bargains. So the devils have to follow the law of what's written. And devils are the only ones that have rights to make these kinds of agreements. And the ruby rod is the authority and the punishment for making and breaking these agreements. So it is a very powerful item because it really lays the foundation for everything that the devils are based on. Everything that grants them power, everything that keeps them growing, everything that keeps them strong, everything that keeps them fighting the demons in the Blood War is all authorized by Asmodeus and the ruby rod. So before we get into the actual origin stories of Asmodeus, understand that there's a bunch of them. There's the Serpent of Law. There is the Pact Primeval, which we're going to actually cover. And there is also the He Who Was story, which is where the ruby rod is supposed to come from. The Old Kings, and each one of them is kind of caught between this lie of which one is actually true. Because all of these exist. The Serpent of Law states him to be Ahriman, a serpent like a coatl of evil and law. And he and his other coatl named Jazarian kind of live in tandem with each other. and one is to balance the other because Jazarian is the lawful good one. And the two of them combined kind of create this perpetual cycle of law between good, evil, and encompass all things in between. And that's the story that Mr. X goes in great detail with. I kind of like this because Jazarian is really important to me because Mercer, the yuan-ti god, eats Jazarian and absorbs all of his power, which is great in contrast to understand how powerful Asmodeus is, and to understand his counterpart was eaten by Mercer. It's really great, and I love Mercer, and anything that makes him show off the power that he has is personally my favorite. The story of He Who Was is a little bit more of kind of like the biblical Asmodeus. Like if you took rebelling against heaven and created that as a character, that's the kind of story of He Who Was. And the Old Kings is really kind of like the counterpoint to the Pact Primeval. But we're going to cover the Pact Primeval because I think it's really cool and it's not a very often told story. So the Pact Primeval is a myth that's told throughout all worlds in the material plane, with countless cultural variants substituting the deities involved. Devils themselves told the story, and it was the most widely accepted version of the multiverse creation. In this version, too, arguably before the beginning of all things, there was chaos, and from it came its living manifestations in demon kind. Lacking time as a tool, and possibly even as an abstract concept, the demons fought each other in an environment of endless disorder for an innumerable period. But this state was intolerable to reality. And so, in this version too, forces of law arose from the chaos to combat it and its demons. Early deities gleaming armor of pure stability with weapons forged of their ideal thought. The forces of law and chaos battled for eons, until the deities of law felt they need to track their progress and so created numbers for recording the slain foes and time to see how long victory would take. They gradually came to suspect, however, that demonkind was infinite, and becoming wary of the conflict, seeking to move on to other projects like creation of worlds and intelligent beings, so they created a beautiful and glorious diverse array of winged warriors to wield their divine magic and do battle on their behalf. The angels. The bravest, the toughest, fiercest, and most beautiful of these angels was Asmodeus. Asmodeus slew more demons than anyone, whether angel or deity. But as the aeons wore on, he and his company became ugly and fearsome, taking on demonic traits to better combat them. Thus, in a way, devils could be said to have come from demons. Eventually, their frightened celestial kin beseeched the gods to banish Asmodeus, and so a trial was held. Asmodeus himself helped to carve the great tablets of law he read from, citing that the first duty of law was to destroy chaos, and his excellence in this field made to a god of war. He counted any displeasure taken with his unsightly appearance as a sacrifice made to keep others pure. Refusing exile on accounts of his lawfulness, they could find no lawful counter against the dark angel who wielded their own clauses better than they. Over time, their alarming aspect, forked tongues, fanged maws, and bodies wreathed in fire, only became more dire. Without any lawful way to stop Asmodeus' host from entering even newly created works in their dominions, the distressed deities decided to focus on the creation of mortals and wonderful worlds to house them. Unfortunately, the bands of Asmodeus had to be called to these worlds to vanquish invading demonic hosts, and proven generally successful in doing so. Though their combined efforts, barriers were created to keep demons away from the material plane through walls, mountains, icy wastes, and vast oceans. Much like Asmodeus's, the newly created worlds were scarred for the betterment of law. Then, to their horror, did the gods discover that the mortals immediately set subverting these barriers, allowing demons hosts back to destroy their paradise. I'm sorry. That was, for some reason, really difficult. Allowing the demon hosts back inside to destroy their paradises. So what this means is that as these entities began creating worlds and places and people and mortals, as they were being created and pulled into reality, demons started infecting them and trying to get inside and destroying them. So they would put up walls, and they would send Asmodeus to go stop and combat them and fight them away. And it didn't matter how successful Asmodeus was, the mortals would even let them in. So it became a real big conflicting problem. Asmodeus came to the gods to answer the lamentations, acknowledging that while the free will to choose obeying the law was important, mortals were curious and lured by demonic promises of freedom, and no matter how many times the process repeated, mortals would always follow the dangled liberty and realize too late it was merely anarchy and destruction. He then answered the further wails of downcast despair with a solution: that voluntary obedience to whom they, as creations, should obey, had to have consequences if they did not. Asmodeus argued that law meant nothing without punishment. At their further questioning, he unsheathed punishment itself, at this time shaped like a mighty sword, an ultimate weapon of law Asmodeus allegedly invented himself. Asmodeus argued that criminals had to suffer as a warning to others. Few made to suffer so that the majority saw the consequences. As usual, no flaw could be found in Asmodeus' logic, and indeed one godling's recognition and pronouncement of this instantly transformed him into a greater deity. Another revelation made that day by the gods was the recognition of principles of good and evil, forces in the cosmos by which gods could and did further separate themselves on the basis of. Those who favored evil offered Asmodeus host further patronage, while those who preferred good drew further away from them. This is the creation of kind of good and evil in the multiverse. Like, this is happening like way early. Like, the gods are just like almost infants where they're learning the whole universe kind of and creating things. And this is kind of that part. The pleased gods had their intermediaries spread knowledge of punishment for sins, truly believing no one would actually violate their laws, only for transgressors to arrive in their domain, and Asmodeus, allegedly aided by Dispater, Mephistopheles, and others, to enact their lawful punishment. Flayed, burned, and otherwise tortured, the horrible screams of the damned filled the celestial realms, and the flowers of their gardens dripped with blood. Unable to ignore the horrors, Asmodeus was once again charged, once again pointed out that he was enacting the rules they agreed upon, once again was met with no counter-argument, and once again proposed a solution. If the gods were unwilling to see the unpleasant side of law, he would take his followers and create a perfect hell in which to enact the torment without them having to see it, and that empty land would later be Baator. The gods were eager to see Asmodeus gone, and he was happy to oblige so long as they made a pact. Drawing forth a ruby rod of power, he produced a document alleged to ensure that he and his forces would carry out divine will, specifying the fate of the damned and allowing his forces to draw magic from the souls. At least one god was suspicious, but Asmodeus assured them that it was for their own benefit, preventing them from becoming independent while still being able to fuel spells and powers away from them. The ancient deities signed the law, and the pact would determine hell's boundaries and the rules for damnation, a deal known as the Pact Primeval. Asmodeus and his now erroneous cohorts descended to the bleak, featureless Baator, and upon the bemoaning of his associates, explained his plans. For many mortal years, the god of law and good revealed in their purified domains, only to discover alarming drop in incoming souls. Conference with their clergies revealed that the forces of Asmodeus, at this point called devils, were intentionally corrupting mortals, and a quickly formed divine delegation soon learned that Baator had been transformed into 9 tiers of horror, the souls harvested from power and transformed into mindless monsters to build a devil army. Upon being told it was not meant to encourage sin, he merely pointed to the letter of the law with a smile. While many suspected Asmodeus got the better of his divine enemies with the Pact Primeval, no mortal had ever actually seen it, as was often the case with legends. Contradictions and sketchy details were abound, and alternate stories were acknowledged to exist despite its acceptance. Furthermore, the legend was not only influenced by devils, but it was also told seemed heavily biased towards Asmodeus, notably in one specific area. If the story was as a whole was to be believed, then Asmodeus' parting after signing the Pact Primeval was not as flawless and peaceful as betrayed. In truth, after committing himself to residing there, he did not simply descend, but was physically cast there by the gods, plunged through the nascent layers he had already begun shaping, and in some version causing the plane to break and reform into 9 layers, and continued to spiral violently, even as the earth of Baator itself protested. He fell until he could literally fall no further, hitting the deepest, darkest part, the pit. Thereafter he laid and schemed, even as his wounds still bled. So this is actually really, really important. The thing that's similar in all of these stories is, and to be truthful, after they signed the pact, Asmodeus was literally cast down. He was literally thrown down. The way it's told is the way it's told from the devils who have been mass kind of producing this story, showing Asmodeus as not being a terrible, terrible person, and that he's doing the right thing, and that he's being punished by doing the right thing, because it's easier to sympathize with somebody that way. Again, Asmodeus is a genius. The important thing that's to note is that as Asmodeus was cast down, he was horribly hurt. And those wounds and everything that he's constantly told us he's always bleeding from, that's true to his true form. Now, I personally really like this one. And again, I do believe the Serpent of Law is not really that off base. I do believe there was a connection between the two. My personal belief is that these two entities, these two stories are the same story. That Asmodeus was always the serpent Armin, and that when the Celestials came about, he used his power to project himself that way. And in creating of this world and the demons infecting them, I think he was used that way. And when they cast him down, he kind of got forced back into his true form. And that's where the serpent of Serpent's Coil, I think, really comes from. But that's just my personal belief. That's just, you pick whatever story you think is better, or whenever officially you feel fits your story or your world. Again, there's no definitive true answer. These are all just the myths behind him. But part of the reason why Asmodeus wants souls is to heal his wounds. And so all the souls that go, a great portion of them are fed directly to Asmodeus, and he devours them in order to cure his wounds. Which is wild, because you got to imagine he's been doing this for aeons, and he's still not fully healed. So it's kind of like really, really intense, that kind of wound that he suffered. Thank you so much for making your way through that video. I know it was a long one, but Asmodeus has a lot to cover. There's pages and pages and pages and pages of lore behind this guy, and so much more to cover. But now that we have all the players, we can finally talk about the Reckoning of Hell, which is something we'll cover for our next video. So look forward to that. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. Thank you so much to our Patreon supporters. We love you guys. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. Definitely consider becoming a Patreon supporter. It really helps us a lot. It makes a huge difference with us being able to do stuff and grow as a channel. And definitely let us know what you think of Asmodeus. Definitely give us some comments. We'd love to hear what you're thinking. And thank you for giving a spooky kid a chance.